The kind of person you are deserves to rot and die in prison. Judge Harold Whitmore hurled the words across the courtroom before Maya Williams could even steady herself. Maya stood at the defense table in County Gray, her wrists cuffed in front of her, her hands trembling so badly the chain rattled. Her lips parted, but for a second, no sound came out. Then her voice finally broke free. "Your Honor, please," she said. "I'm innocent. I didn't do this." Whitmore's face twisted with contempt. "Innocent? A jury heard the evidence and found you guilty. Do not stand there and insult this court with another lie." "It's not a lie," Maya said, shaking harder. "I was at the library. My student ID was scanned. There were witnesses. Please, you have to listen to me. I have heard enough from people like you." The room went still. Her public defender, Leonard Pike, pushed to his feet. "Your Honor, Miss Williams has consistently maintained that the state's evidence was weak. There were serious issues with identification, and the defense would ask." "Sit down, Mr. Pike." Pike hesitated, then lowered himself back into his chair. Whitmore looked down at Maya again. "You thought your age would save you. You thought tears and a student record would make this court forget what you are." Maya's eyes filled. "No, sir," she said. "I didn't rob anyone. I didn't hurt anyone." Whitmore opened the sentencing file and flipped through it with cold deliberation. "You stand before this court convicted of a violent felony, and still you try to make yourself the victim." "I am the victim," Maya said before she could stop herself. Whitmore looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" Maya swallowed hard, but she did not take it back. "I didn't do this. Nobody wanted to look at the evidence that proved it." That changed his expression. His gaze hardened into something personal. "Truth takes character, discipline, decency. You were raised without any of it." Maya stared at him. Whitmore leaned forward. "And that failure did not begin with you. It began with the woman who raised you." Leonard Pike's head jerked up. Emily Ross, standing at the prosecution table, turned fully toward the bench. Whitmore kept going. "Somewhere along the line, your mother failed you. Failed to teach you shame. Failed to teach you restraint. Failed to teach you how to live under the law instead of above it." Maya went pale. "Don't. A mother's job is to raise a daughter fit for decent society, not one who ends up in chains begging for mercy in my courtroom." "Don't talk about my mother," Maya said, her voice breaking. "Why not?" Whitmore shot back. "She should be talked about. A woman who raises a daughter like this should be ashamed to say she ever had a child at all." Maya flinched like she had been struck. Leonard Pike stood again. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate." Whitmore did not look at him. "Sit down, counselor." Pike sat, defeated. Maya's face was wet now, her breathing uneven, her whole body visibly trembling. But when she spoke again, her voice came from somewhere deeper than fear. "You don't know anything about my mother." Whitmore gave a short, ugly laugh. "I know enough. She failed, and now you are standing here as proof." "No," Maya said, shaking her head. "My mother taught me to tell the truth. She taught me not to bow to people just because they enjoy hurting someone weaker than them." Whitmore's face darkened. "My mother did not fail me. You did," Maya said, louder now, tears on her cheeks. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Whitmore snatched the thick stack of prosecution exhibits from the bench. "What did you say?" he barked. The bundle struck her high in the chest. Maya gasped and staggered backward. Her cuffed hands could not catch her balance. She hit the edge of the defense table, and a jagged nail tore into her forearm. Blood appeared at once. The courtroom erupted. "Your Honor," Emily Ross said. Leonard Pike lunged to help Maya upright. "She's bleeding." Maya clutched the table edge, breathing hard, stunned from the impact. Blood slid from the cut and dripped onto the floor beside the scattered exhibits that had been used to condemn her. Whitmore did not move. He did not apologize. He looked down at her with the same cold fury. "Maybe now you understand what happens when you forget your place." Emily Ross stared at him in disbelief. Leonard Pike pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it carefully against Maya's arm. She winced, but forced herself upright. Her body shook harder than before. The pain had put tears back in her eyes, but it had not bent her. Whitmore picked up the sentencing order. "Maya Williams," he said, as if nothing had happened. "This court finds that your conduct, your lack of remorse, and your continued defiance leave no room for leniency." Leonard Pike looked up in horror. "Your Honor, she needs medical attention. She will receive it in custody." Maya lifted her head. Blood stained the side of her sleeve now. Her face had gone white, but her eyes remained fixed on him. Whitmore continued, each word clean and brutal. "This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words landed with terrible force. Maya stopped breathing for a second. Whitmore went on. "In addition, the court imposes the maximum statutory fines, full court costs, and every post-judgment fee allowed by law." "My family can't pay that," Maya said faintly. Whitmore's mouth hardened. "Then your mother can spend the rest of her life remembering exactly what she raised." Leonard Pike closed his eyes. In the gallery, someone whispered, "Lord have mercy." Maya stood there, bleeding, shaking, and newly sentenced to die behind bars for a crime she did not commit. She looked at the papers on the floor, at the blood on her sleeve, at the man on the bench who had just stripped the law of all pretense. Then she looked back up at him, and in that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood the same thing. This was no longer a sentencing. It was a public act of destruction. Dưới đây là bản rút gọn chương 2. Giữ các tình tiết quan trọng và nhịp truyện tập trung hơn. Leonard Pike pressed his handkerchief harder against Maya's forearm as the deputies moved in. "Easy," he whispered. "Easy, Maya." She barely heard him. She was still trying to grasp what life without parole actually meant. The words did not feel real yet. They hovered somewhere above the sting in her arm, above the blood soaking through her sleeve, above the ringing in her ears. Her knees threatened to buckle again, but she locked them and forced herself upright. Judge Harold Whitmore was already gathering his papers, as if he had just finished an ordinary afternoon hearing. "To the custody of the U.S. Marshals," he said flatly. "Remove her." Emily Ross stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Your Honor, the defendant is injured." Whitmore did not look at her. "Then medical staff can assess her downstairs." Emily's jaw tightened. "She's bleeding because of what just happened in your courtroom." Whitmore's eyes snapped up. "Miss Ross, I strongly advise you to remember where you are." The warning froze the room. Emily stopped speaking, but she did not stop seeing. Maya stood there in cuffs, pale and shaking, blood running down her arm onto the courtroom floor, and something inside Emily shifted in a way that would not shift back. One of the deputies reached for Maya's elbow, more carefully now. "Let's go." Maya drew in one unsteady breath. "I want the record to reflect," she said, her voice hoarse but clear, "that I said I was innocent." Whitmore gave a cold smile. "The record reflects that you are convicted." Maya lifted her eyes to him. "No, the record reflects what you wanted." Leonard Pike closed his eyes for a second. Whitmore's expression hardened. "Take her out." The deputies turned her toward the side door. Maya stumbled once, and the older deputy tightened his grip just enough to keep her from falling without making a show of helping her. As they passed the gallery, an older black woman in a dark church coat rose halfway from her seat, tears shining in her eyes. "Baby," she whispered, too softly for the judge to hear. "Hold on. If you feel for Maya, like this video and comment where you're watching from. You never know. Someone near you may be watching this story too. And don't forget to subscribe." Maya looked at her for only a second, but it was enough. There was no pity in that glance, only recognition. The woman had seen this kind of wound before. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than the room they had left. Leonard Pike followed as far as the deputies allowed, his briefcase half open, papers jutting out like his thoughts had not caught up with what had just happened. "I'm filing emergency motions," he said quickly. "Appeal, judicial misconduct, everything I can think of." Maya turned her head toward him. Her face was white from pain and shock. "You should have fought harder before." The words were not cruel. They were tired. Pike swallowed. "I know." She gave him nothing after that. At the end of the corridor, they took her into a holding elevator reserved for prisoners and marshals. The metal doors closed with a heavy thud. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. One deputy stood beside her, the other across from her. Both kept their eyes forward. Maya leaned back against the wall and looked down at the handkerchief wrapped around her arm. The white cloth had turned dark red. Life without parole. This time the phrase landed. Not 15 years. Not 20. Not a sentence with an end date she could cling to. Whitmore had not punished her. He had erased her future. Her breathing thinned. She thought of her dorm room near campus. The stack of casebooks on her desk. A cheap lamp with a bent shade. A chipped blue mug. The sweater her mother kept telling her not to leave on the floor. Tiny things. Ordinary things. The kind of life no one notices until someone takes it away. The elevator opened onto the holding level. The air downstairs smelled like bleach, concrete, and stale ventilation. They led her into a cramped side room where a tired medic waited with latex gloves and a metal tray. He unwrapped the cloth, examined the cut, and frowned. That should have had stitches already, he muttered. The younger deputy asked, "Can you do that here?" The medic glanced toward the hallway. Not without clearance. Maya let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Even this needed permission. The medic cleaned the wound, taped fresh gauze over it, and avoided her eyes for too long to pretend he felt nothing. When he finished, they moved her not into a cell, but into a small interview room with a bolted metal table, 2 chairs, and a security camera fixed high in one corner. Someone placed a bottle of water and a wrapped turkey sandwich on the table. No one explained why. Maybe the building was nervous now. Maybe word of what had happened upstairs was already moving through the courthouse. Maya sat slowly. Her shoulders ached where the bundle had hit her. The cut in her arm throbbed under the bandage. Her cuffs were still on. She looked at the sandwich without touching it. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. Emily Ross stepped inside. She had taken off her suit jacket, and the top button at her throat was undone. For the first time that day, she looked less like a prosecutor and more like a young woman who had just seen something she could not explain away. The deputy at the door hesitated, then stepped aside only because she was still the prosecutor on the case. 5 minutes. Emily nodded. When the door shut, she stayed standing for a moment. "I shouldn't be here," she said. Maya looked at her. "Then why are you?" Emily glanced at the bandage. "Because that should not have happened." Maya's mouth tightened. A lot of things shouldn't have happened. Emily accepted that without argument. She stepped closer to the table and laid a folded document in front of Maya. "Did your lawyer ever show you the full financial order?" Maya frowned. "No." Emily opened the paper. "He didn't just sentence you to life. He added nearly every discretionary cost he could justify. Court recovery fees, compliance assessments, monitoring costs, administrative enforcement charge." Maya stared at the page, then up at her. "Why?" Emily did not answer. She didn't need to. Maya lowered her voice. "He does this a lot, doesn't he?" Emily glanced toward the security camera, then back at Maya. "I've seen him be harsh. I've seen him be unfair. But this," she exhaled. "No, this was not normal. It was normal for him," Maya said quietly. "He knew exactly what he was doing." Emily studied her face for a long second. "When he started talking about your mother," she said at last, "why didn't you tell him who she was?" Maya's eyes cooled immediately. "That is not your business." "Maybe not," Emily said, "but I think it matters now." Maya leaned back in the chair, every movement controlled, despite the pain in her arm. "What matters is that he thought he could do that to me, because he believed no one with power would ever come asking questions." Emily said nothing. Maya looked down again at the paper. Fee after fee, charge after charge. A second punishment built on top of the first. Prison was only one kind of burial. Debt was another. A knock sounded at the door. The older deputy opened it halfway. "Miss Ross, they want you upstairs." Emily straightened, but she did not move at once. Then she spoke quietly. "I pulled 3 old cases before I came down here. 3 old cases. Black defendants, low income, same judge, same pattern of extra fees." Maya held her gauze. Emily swallowed. "I don't know exactly what this is yet, but I don't think you're the first." The room went still. For the first time since the sentence, something inside Maya shifted too. Not hope. It was too early for that. But it was no longer pure despair. What Whitmore had done to her had a pattern, a shape, and patterns could be exposed. At the door, Emily paused. If there's something I need to know about your mother, about why he reacted the way he did, Maya cut her off. When the time comes, you'll know. Emily searched her face, then nodded once and left. The door shut behind her. Maya sat alone again with the water, the untouched sandwich, and the sentencing order spread across the metal table like a second wound. Somewhere above her, life in the courthouse was still moving. Elevators opening, phones ringing, clerks filing paperwork, lawyers going home to ordinary evenings. Down here, under the same building, Maya Williams finally understood what Harold Whitmore had really tried to do. He had not just sentenced her, he had priced her life as if it were disposable. And upstairs, the first crack had already begun to spread. Emily Ross did not go back to her office right away. She rode the elevator up with the sentencing packet still in her hand, her jaw tight, her mind replaying the sound of the file striking Maya Williams in the chest. By the time the doors opened on the courtroom floor, most of the hallway had emptied. The late afternoon rush had begun. Clerks carried boxes. A janitor rolled a gray cart past the elevators. Somewhere down the corridor, a bailiff laughed too loudly at something that was not funny. Inside courtroom 7B, Judge Harold Whitmore was in chambers. His clerk, Nolan Pierce, was gathering loose papers from the bench. Emily stepped inside. "Where's the final cost breakdown?" Nolan looked up. "What?" "The sentencing attachments. The fee schedule," he added to the Williams case. Nolan hesitated. "They'll be filed." "I asked where they are." He lowered his voice. Judge Whitmore took the hard copy into chambers. Emily stared at him. "Why?" Nolan's expression tightened. "You know how he is." "Yes," Emily thought. "I'm beginning to." She turned without another word and walked down the side corridor toward Whitmore's private office. She knocked once. "Come in," he said. Whitmore was standing behind his desk, robe still on, glasses off now, pouring himself a cup of coffee from a carafe that had gone stale hours earlier. He looked almost relaxed. That, more than anything, made Emily's skin crawl. "You wanted something, Miss Ross?" Emily stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "The Williams sentencing order." He took a sip. "What about it?" "The enhanced financial penalties. I'd like to review the calculation." Whitmore set the cup down. "You're the prosecutor, not an auditor." "I'm also an officer of the court." His eyes sharpened. "Careful." Emily did not retreat. "Those numbers were unusually high. For a violent offender facing life?" Whitmore asked. "Not unusually high. Appropriate. She's 20. She's convicted. The evidence was thin. That was for the jury. And the jury has spoken." Emily held his gaze. "You also struck the defendant with a file in open court." Whitmore's silence lasted just long enough to be threatening. "She lost her footing," he said at last. Emily knew a lie when she heard one. The problem was that so did he, and he did not care. She was bleeding, and she received treatment. Emily took one slow breath. "I've reviewed 3 of your recent cases from the past year. 2 black defendants, 1 Latino, all low income, all sentenced with additional fee structures that went well beyond standard practice. Similar language, similar add-ons." Whitmore's face did not change, but something in the room tightened. "I suggest," he said, "that you stop confusing your political education with legal expertise. This isn't politics." "No," he said softly. "It's ambition. Young lawyers often mistake discomfort for conscience. They see one difficult hearing and suddenly imagine corruption where there is only discipline." Emily said nothing. Whitmore walked around the desk and stopped close enough to remind her he had spent decades making people step back first. "You are here because people like me built standards into this system," he said. "We held the line when other people wanted excuses. We protected decent neighborhoods from chaos. We imposed order when softness became fashionable." Emily kept her voice level. "Order is not the same thing as cruelty." A faint smile touched his mouth. "To people who have never had to clean up after lawlessness, it often looks the same." He moved past her and opened the chamber door, dismissing her without using the word. Emily left, but she did not go far. Back in the corridor, she stood still for a moment, then headed for records. The records office on the lower administrative floor always smelled like dust, copier, toner, and old cardboard. A man named Calvin Reese sat behind the glass partition with reading glasses halfway down his nose, stamping return label. Emily slid her credentials under the opening. I need archived sentencing appendices for Judge Whitmore. Last 3 years. Cases with post-judgment fee assessments. Calvin glanced at the badge, then at her face. That's a lot of paper. I can wait. He studied her another second. Most people asking for Whitmore files don't look like they want to read them. I do. He disappeared into the back and returned with a cart half an hour later. Emily spent the next 2 hours with legal pads, case folders, and a stale vending machine coffee that tasted burned. The pattern became harder to ignore with every page. Young black defendants, older black defendants, poor white defendants from the South Side, a disabled veteran, a grocery clerk, a 19-year-old with no prior record. Again and again, Whitmore's language repeated itself. Administrative recovery, supplemental review, compliance monitoring, judicial processing enhancement. The names varied. The result did not. The poor paid more. The black defendants paid most. And every time one of those unusual fee packages appeared, a secondary notation surfaced elsewhere in the file trail, usually buried in vendor references or court-approved consulting support. One name kept returning: the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund. Emily stared at it until the words stopped looking accidental. She pulled another file. Same thing. And another. By the time she sat back in her chair, the courthouse lights outside the records room had dimmed into evening mode. Cleaning crews had begun their rounds. Her coffee had gone cold. Calvin Reese returned with a stack of incoming storage slips and found her still there. You look like somebody just ruined your religion, he said. Emily looked up slowly. Did you ever notice this name? He followed her finger to the line item and grunted. Notice? Sure. Ask questions? That's different. Why? Calvin gave a tired laugh. Because folks around here like their jobs. Emily lowered her voice. What is it? He hesitated, then leaned one forearm on the counter. Officially, reform seminars, legal consulting, training support, all that polished nonsense. He glanced toward the hallway before continuing. Unofficially, every old hand in this building knows certain judges got favorite channels. Money moves. Nobody writes it plain, but it moves. Emily felt a chill go through her. Who runs it? Calvin straightened up. That's where smart people stop digging. She held his eyes. I'm asking anyway. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. Judge's brother-in-law is tied to a consulting board. Nephew too, from what I heard. Never saw that in writing. He tapped the folder. Just saw the same roads used too many times. Emily's mouth went dry. Upstairs, in a locked interview room, Maya Williams sat alone with a wrapped turkey sandwich she still had not touched. The courthouse had grown quieter around her, but not kinder. Her arm throbbed beneath the bandage. Every few minutes she heard footsteps in the hall, keys at belts, distant metal doors opening and closing. Life without parole. She said the words silently now, testing their shape. It still did not feel real. Nothing did. Not the judge's voice. Not the blood on her sleeve. Not the way he had spoken about her mother. As if a woman he had never met were just another object to drag through the dirt. Prison was one thing. Debt was another. He had wanted both. The door window darkened for a second as someone paused outside, then moved on. Maya lowered her eyes to the sentencing papers Emily had left behind. She read the charges again, then the fees, then the language. Each line was colder than the one before it. At the top of the final page, clipped into the order as supporting administrative documentation, was a reference code she had not noticed before. ILFE. Maya stared at the initials. Then she looked up as the door opened and Emily Ross stepped back into the room, her face paler than before. What is WLCF? Maya asked. Emily closed the door behind her. For a second, she said nothing. Then she pulled out the chair across from Maya and sat down. I think, she said carefully, your judge may not just be cruel. Maya held her eyes. Emily set a stack of copied pages on the table. I think he's making money. Maya looked at Emily Ross without blinking. For a moment, The only sound in the holding room was the low hum of the overhead vent. "What do you mean, making money?" Maya asked. Emily slid the copied pages across the metal table. "I went through several older sentencing files from Whitmore's courtroom. Same pattern. Black defendants, poor defendants, weak room to fight back. He piles on court costs, administrative fees, compliance charges, monitoring expenses. The language changes a little, but the structure stays the same." Maya looked down at the pages. Her bandaged arm lay stiff at her side. "And that code?" Emily tapped the line at the bottom of one attachment. "WLCF, the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund." Maya's expression did not change, but her eyes sharpened. "That's not a court office." "No," Emily said. "It's presented as a consulting entity. Reform training, legal compliance support, continuing judicial education. On paper it looks respectable, maybe even boring." She paused. "It keeps showing up around the same cases that got buried under extra financial penalties." Maya read in silence for a few seconds. Names, numbers, lines of cold official language, everything designed to sound routine. "He targets people who can't push back," she said, quietly. Emily did not answer right away. "That's what it looks like," she said at last. Maya let out one slow breath. "Not just prison," she murmured. "Debt too." "Yes." Maya leaned back against the chair and stared at the stack. "So he doesn't just ruin people. He invoices them." Emily looked at her sharply. That was exactly what this felt like. And hearing Maya say it aloud made it even uglier. Before she could respond, the door opened. The older deputy stood there, expression tight. "Miss Ross, you're needed upstairs." Emily rose. "I'll be back." The deputy's eyes flicked to Maya, then to the papers on the table. "You should take those with you." Emily understood the warning. She gathered the copies, left one page behind by accident, then seemed to realize it and deliberately did not reach back for it. 5 minutes, she told Maya quietly. When the door shut again, Maya looked at the single sheet left on the table. It was a summary page from another case. The defendant was a 19-year-old black male from the South Side. No prior felonies. Sentenced under Whitmore 2 years earlier. The financial penalties were so high Maya had to read the total twice. At the bottom, in neat typed print, was the same code, WLCF. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second. Judge Harold Whitmore had looked down at her from that bench like she was filth, like she was one more dangerous thing dragged in from the streets. But this was not about morality. It was not even about punishment. It was business. The thought made her stomach turn. Upstairs, the courthouse had taken on the nervous pulse of a place that could sense something shifting, but did not yet know where the collapse would start. Emily walked fast down the corridor toward the smaller conference room beside the clerk's office. Inside, 2 men from court administration were already waiting with Nolan Pierce, Whitmore's clerk. Files were stacked on the table. Nobody looked comfortable. One of the administrators, a gray-haired man named Gerald Finn, spoke first. "Miss Ross, there's concern you've been requesting records outside the scope of your case." Emily stayed standing. "There's concern because I found a pattern." Gerald folded his hands. "What you found may be standard discretionary practice that you are misreading." Nolan kept his eyes on the table. Emily said, "Standard practice doesn't explain why extra fees cluster around the same kinds of defendants, or why a private consulting fund keeps appearing in associated paperwork." That made Nolan look up. Gerald's voice turned cooler. "You are making a serious accusation. I'm asking a serious question." From the hallway came the sound of measured footsteps. Then the door opened. Judge Whitmore entered without hurry. The room changed immediately. Gerald stood. Nolan stood. Emily remained where she was. Whitmore looked at her once, then at the files on the table. "Still chasing paperwork, Miss Ross? I found enough to ask why your courtroom keeps routing unusual costs through entities tied to WLCF." Whitmore's face stayed calm, but his eyes went flat. "That fund supports lawful judicial training initiatives. Then why is it attached so often to cases involving poor defendants with inflated penalties?" Gerald cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all slow down." "No." Emily said. I don't think we should. Whitmore stepped farther into the room. This is what happens when youth mistakes suspicion for intelligence. Emily met his stare. Did you build a revenue stream out of sentencing people who couldn't fight back? Nolan inhaled sharply. Whitmore did not raise his voice. You are dangerously close to career suicide. Emily felt the threat land, but she did not move. And you're dangerously close to something worse. For one brief second, no one spoke. Then Whitmore smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression Emily had ever seen on a human face, because there was no warmth in it at all. You saw one girl cry in court, he said, and now you think you've discovered this. She was bleeding. She was sentenced. She was innocent. That did it. Whitmore's smile vanished. You are in no position, he said, each word clipped and precise, to tell me what innocence looks like. Emily answered before caution could stop her. Maybe not, but I know what cruelty looks like, Gerald muttered. Enough. Whitmore turned from Emily to the administrators as though deciding whether she was worth crushing immediately or later. I want all non-essential file access on my prior sentencing appendices suspended until further review. Emily spoke at once. You can't lock down records because I asked questions. Whitmore looked back at her. Watch me. He walked out. Gerald exhaled hard and rubbed his forehead. Nolan sat down slowly, visibly shaken. Emily understood in that instant that whatever line she had crossed, there was no stepping back over it. Whitmore was scared now. Not openly. Not enough for most people to recognize it. But scared men with power did not tighten access unless something mattered. Downstairs, Maya still sat alone when another key turned in the lock. This time it was not Emily. A woman in a dark coat entered first, followed by two men in plain suits Maya did not recognize. The woman was tall, elegant, and controlled in the way a drawn blade is controlled. She carried no purse, no briefcase, no wasted motion. Her face was composed, but her eyes went instantly to the bandage on Maya's arm. Maya stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. For the first time since the sentence, something broke across her face that was not fear and not anger. Mom. Evelyn Williams stepped toward her daughter and stopped just short of touching the blood-stained sleeve. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. Tell me everything he did. And in the hallway outside, people who still did not know who Maya Williams really was began to understand that the quiet in the building was over. Maya's throat tightened so hard she could barely speak. Evelyn Williams stood in front of her in a dark wool coat and black gloves, her face composed, her eyes fixed on the bandage around Maya's arm. The two men behind her remained near the door, silent and watchful. They were not courthouse staff. They carried themselves differently, more precise, more dangerous. Maya swallowed. He threw the file at me. Evelyn did not blink. Start from the beginning. The room felt smaller now. The metal table, the untouched sandwich, the camera in the corner, the fluorescent light humming overhead. Maya looked at her mother and realized she had never seen her like this before. Not angry in the ordinary sense. Colder than anger. Focused. He called me trash before the sentencing even started, Maya said. He said I deserved to rot and die in prison. I told him I was innocent. He kept cutting me off. Then, he started talking about you. One of the men at the door shifted slightly. Evelyn did not move. What did he say? Maya's voice dropped. He said you failed me. He said you should be ashamed to have raised me. He said I was proof that you failed as a mother. For one brief second, Evelyn's face changed. It was not a collapse. It was something far worse than that. A stillness so complete, it forced the whole room to feel it. Maya kept going. I told him not to talk about you. I said the failure in that courtroom wasn't yours. She glanced down at her bandaged arm. That's when he threw the file. Evelyn stepped closer. Did anyone touch you after? The medic cleaned it. No stitches. They said they needed clearance. The woman's jaw tightened. One of the men behind her, broad-shouldered with a close-cut gray beard, took out a small notebook. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'd like a full statement while details are fresh. Evelyn raised one hand without looking back. Not yet. She reached out then, very carefully, and touched Maya's uninjured shoulder. It was the first physical contact since she had entered. The gesture was small, but it almost undid Maya more than the sentence had. She looked away fast, fighting the sting in her eyes. "I told you," Evelyn said softly. "If they believed no one would come asking questions, they would show you exactly what they are." Maya gave a short, brittle laugh that held no humor at all. "I didn't think it would happen this fast. Neither did I." That answer hung between them. Evelyn took off one glove, then the other, and laid them neatly on the table beside the untouched sandwich. "Look at me." Maya did. "You are not going to disappear in this building," Evelyn said. "Do you understand?" Maya nodded once. "No," Evelyn said. "Say it. I'm not going to disappear in this building." Again, her voice steadier now. Maya repeated it. "I'm not going to disappear in this building." Evelyn gave the smallest nod. Then she turned to the men at the door. "I want photographs of that injury. I want the medical refusal documented. I want the courtroom transcript preserved before anyone starts cleaning language." The man with the notebook answered at once. "Already in motion. And nobody moves Judge Whitmore's files." "Yes, ma'am." The second man, younger, with a federal credential clipped inside his coat, stepped into the room. "We've got resistance upstairs. Court administration says prior sentencing appendices are being restricted." Evelyn's eyes cooled. "By whose order?" "Whitmore's." Of course. She picked up the sentencing packet on the table and scanned it with frightening speed. Her gaze moved over the life sentence first, then the financial breakdown. Line after line of fees, assessments, recovery charges, enforcement costs. When she reached the bottom, she stopped. "What is WLCF?" Maya asked quietly. Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at the letters again, then at the older agent. "Pull corporate records, donor filings, tax structure, board membership, vendor linkage, full sweep. Tonight." The man nodded. "You know the acronym?" "I know it shouldn't be there." A beat passed. Maya understood then that her mother had seen something bigger than a cruel sentence. Something systemic. Something familiar. The door opened behind them, and Emily Ross stepped inside. She stopped dead when she saw Evelyn Williams. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Emily had seen the Attorney General on television, in Senate hearings, at podiums, in legal journals. But those versions had all been framed by distance and office. This one was standing inside a concrete holding room beneath a federal courthouse, next to a bleeding 20-year-old in cuffs. Emily found her voice first. "Madam, Attorney General." Evelyn turned toward her. "You're the prosecutor who came downstairs." Emily nodded. "Emily Ross. You brought her the financial order." "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Emily looked at Maya, then back at Evelyn. "Because what happened upstairs was wrong. And because after I reviewed other cases, I started to think it wasn't just wrong. It was patterned." Evelyn studied her face. "You said, started." Emily understood the test. "Now I'm sure." One of the agents shifted, skeptical. Evelyn didn't tell him to stop. Emily stepped closer to the table and laid down another small stack of copied pages. "I found similar fee structures in multiple cases. Mostly black defendants. Mostly poor. Same inflated administrative language. Same references tied to WLCF. I also found informal indications that the fund may be linked to Judge Whitmore's family." The room went silent. Maya watched her mother read the first page, then the next. The Attorney General's face remained controlled, but something in the air sharpened with every line. Finally, Evelyn looked up. "Did anyone else see you copy these?" Emily hesitated. "Court administration knows I asked questions. Whitmore knows I'm looking." "That makes you useful," Evelyn said. "And vulnerable." Emily straightened. "I understand." "Do you?" Evelyn asked. "Because after tonight, this is not professional discomfort. This is a federal corruption inquiry orbiting an active judge who believed he could bury my daughter under prison time and debt. If you stay in this, you do not drift in and out when it becomes inconvenient." Emily met her eyes. "I'm staying." Maya looked between them. The room had changed again. It no longer felt like a place where she had been left to wait. It felt like the first chamber of a war her judge had not seen coming. Evelyn handed the pages to the older agent. Seal Whitmore's courtroom records. Notify DOJ Public Integrity. Alert the Inspector General. And I want every discretionary fee order he signed in the last 5 years. The younger agent asked. And the judge himself? Evelyn picked up her gloves from the table, but did not put them on. Not yet, she said. First, I want to know how many lives he sold before he touched mine. Maya felt those words settle into the room like law. Upstairs, Judge Harold Whitmore was still behind his desk, telling himself control had not slipped. Telling himself a frightened girl and an ambitious young prosecutor could not undo years of authority. But beneath the courthouse, in a concrete room he would never have considered important, the ground under him had already begun to give way. And for the first time since the sentence was read, Maya no longer felt buried. She felt the weight above her shifting. By 9:30 that night, the federal building no longer felt like a courthouse. It felt like a body trying to hide its own fever. Doors that were usually left half open were suddenly closed. Clerks who normally shuffled past one another with stacks of paper now stopped talking when unfamiliar faces came into view. 2 men from the Department of Justice had taken over a small conference room on the administrative floor. A woman from the Inspector General's office was on a secure line in Washington. Down in the holding area, Maya Williams sat with fresh gauze on her arm and dried blood still stiff on the sleeve of her county-issued shirt, while the machine that had tried to swallow her began, piece by piece, to choke on its own paperwork. Emily Ross was the one moving between those 2 worlds. When she stepped out of the conference room, the younger DOJ agent caught up with her in the hallway. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was in his 30s, clean-cut, sharp-eyed, and already carrying too many folders. "We've got preliminary corporate pulls," he said, quietly. "WLCF is real. Registered nonprofit advisory entity. Public-facing mission is judicial education, sentencing reform support, and legal systems consulting." Emily kept walking. "Who's on the board?" "Officially, civic names, retired attorneys, one former accounting professor. Looks harmless." He handed her a sheet. "Unofficially, the fund's operations are tied through vendor management to a consulting shell controlled by Whitmore's brother-in-law, Stuart Bell." Emily stopped walking. "And the nephew?" she asked. Mercer nodded. "Caleb Bell, listed under outside procurement management for 2 affiliated contractors." Emily looked down at the papers. The names sat there in clean black print, respectable and dry. That was the thing about corruption in institutions. It rarely announced itself with blood. Most of the time it wore the language of administration and waited for people to get bored before the damage registered. "Do they have direct transfers from court-imposed penalties?" she asked. Mercer exhaled. "Not directly, not stupidly. Money moves through approved administrative channels first, then into service agreements, compliance education contracts, consulting reimbursements, enough layers to make it sound legitimate, but not enough," Emily said. "No," he replied. "Not enough." They reached the records room and found it half locked down. Calvin Reese was inside, behind the counter, arguing in a low voice with Nolan Pierce, Whitmore's Nolan looked up the moment he saw Emily and Mercer. "This area is under temporary review," Nolan said too quickly. "No further file access without judicial approval." Mercer showed his credentials. "Judicial approval is no longer your strongest shield tonight." Nolan's face lost color. Calvin Reese leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Well, that's the first sensible thing I've heard in this building in years." Emily stepped to the counter. "I need every case in the past 5 years with supplemental compliance assessments or enhanced court recovery language." Nolan tried again. "Those records are sensitive." Mercer's voice stayed calm. "Which is exactly why we're taking them." Calvin rose, slower than the others, and adjusted his glasses. "Told you, those roads got used too many times," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. Nolan's jaw tightened. "You should be careful what you imply." Calvin gave him a long, tired look. "Son, at my age, careful is what you become after you spent too many years watching wrong things happen in quiet rooms." Emily said nothing. She just took the first box Calvin set on the counter and started sorting. The pattern sharpened with every file. A black single father fined into bankruptcy after a non-violent conviction. A 17-year-old transferred into adult court and hit with lifelong court debt. A home health aide sentenced under Whitmore after a plea she barely understood. Then charged with monitoring compliance fees that followed her for years. An unemployed veteran who missed payments and was brought back into the system like a delinquent account instead of a citizen. Every case carried its own wound. Together they told the truth. Whitmore did not merely sentence people. He priced them according to how little protection he believed stood behind their names. Downstairs, Maya sat alone again for almost 20 minutes after Evelyn had been pulled into another secure room with agents and attorneys. The turkey sandwich still sat untouched. She had taken one sip of water and nothing more. The adrenaline from the courtroom had drained out of her, leaving behind a deep, strange exhaustion that felt heavier than sleep. A female marshal came to the door and unlocked it. "Miss Williams," she said, more gently than Maya expected. "We need to move you to a secure room." Maya stood slowly. "Am I being transferred?" "No." "Then what is this?" The marshal hesitated. "It means people upstairs are finally using different words when they say your name." Maya almost asked what that meant, but she was too tired to spend strength on answers people only half gave. She followed the marshal down a narrower hall to a room that looked less like a holding cell and more like an interview space used for protected witnesses. There was no camera in the corner this time. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a soft humming vent. When the door opened again, Evelyn stepped inside alone. She had removed her coat. The dark suit beneath it was immaculate despite the hour, but the line of fatigue around her mouth had deepened. She sat down across from Maya and placed a thin folder on the table. "We confirmed the fund," she said. Maya looked at her mother's face. And it's worse than I hoped, and not as surprising as I feared." Maya let that settle. "He's been doing this for a long time." "Yes." "To black defendants?" "Yes." "To poor people?" "Yes." Maya stared at the table. Her voice dropped. "He knew what he was doing when he looked at me." Evelyn did not soften the truth. "Yes." The room went quiet. Maya felt the answer move through her more painfully than the cut in her arm had. Not because she had never understood prejudice. She had. Every black woman in America learned early to read tone, posture, interruption, suspicion. But there was something different about hearing it confirmed in the language of design. He had not simply hated what he saw. He had built a system around it. "He talked about you like he had the right," Maya said. Evelyn's eyes held hers. "Men like Whitmore always think they have the right. The question is, how long everyone else agrees to pretend they do." Maya looked away for a second, blinking back the hot pressure gathering behind her eyes. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd see the system honestly. And now you have." Maya gave a bitter laugh. "Honestly feels expensive." Evelyn glanced at the bandage. That was always part of the design. She opened the folder and slid a page toward her daughter. It was a summary chart. Columns, names, penalty totals, race, income level, added fees, repeat codes. Maya read the first 5 lines, then stopped. There were too many. A knock sounded, and Daniel Mercer stepped in. "Ma'am, we have movement." Evelyn looked up. "What kind?" "Financial." 2 affiliated accounts tied to Bell Consulting were accessed within the last hour. "Someone's trying to shift money." Evelyn rose immediately. "Freeze them," she said. "We're moving." "And Whitmore?" Mercer's expression hardened. "Still in chambers. Still acting like this is a misunderstanding." Evelyn picked up her coat from the chair but did not put it on yet. "That will pass." Mercer left. Evelyn turned back to Maya. "For tonight, you stay under federal protection," she said. "No transfer. No general holding. No one touches your file without authorization from my office." Maya nodded. Evelyn stepped closer, and for a moment she looked less like the Attorney General than a mother forcing herself to remain made of steel while standing in front of her injured child. "This is no longer just about what he did to you in that courtroom," she said. "It's about what he has done to hundreds of people who never had anyone walk through that door for them." Maya looked up slowly. Something in her was changing. Not healing. Not yet. But hardening into shape. When this breaks, she said quietly, I want every name. Evelyn studied her daughter for one long second, then gave a small nod. That, she said, is the first thing you've said tonight that sounds like me. Outside the secure room, the building's lights burned late into the night. Records were boxed. Accounts were flagged. Whispers became calls. Calls became orders. And somewhere above them, Judge Harold Whitmore still sat inside the chambers he had ruled from for years, unaware that the numbers he had hidden behind legal language were finally beginning to speak. At 11:14 p.m., the first family arrived carrying a grocery envelope full of receipts. Emily Ross saw them through the glass wall of the temporary conference room on the administrative floor. An older black woman in a church hat she had clearly put back on in a hurry. A middle-aged man, in work boots, and a faded Union jacket, and a younger woman holding a manila folder tight against her chest, like it might fall apart if she loosened her grip. They were not supposed to be there that late. But once word started moving through Chicago that Judge Harold Whitmore's old fee orders were being reviewed, people came. Not because they trusted the system, because they had been waiting years for a crack in it. Daniel Mercer met them at the door, took their names, and brought the folder inside. Emily stood at the long table, surrounded by boxes of records, copied fee schedules, printouts of corporate filings, and styrofoam cups gone cold. Evelyn Williams was at the far end on a secure call with Washington, speaking in low, clipped sentences. She ended the call the moment she saw the envelope. Who are they? Evelyn asked. Mercer opened the flap and spread the contents out. Old payment receipts, late notices, court enforcement letters. All stamped, dated, and folded so many times the creases were turning white. Family from a 2022 case, he said. Defendant was Andre Fuller, 19 at conviction. Black, no priors, non-violent burglary plea. Whitmore gave him 12 years and layered on fees. Emily picked up one receipt. $690 for compliance review. Another sheet. Monitoring recovery fee. Administrative processing assessment. Post-judgment enforcement. The older woman stepped forward from the doorway before anyone had invited her in. Her face was lined, tired, dignified. He never even explained what half those words meant, she said. Just kept sending bills. My grandson got time, and then we got punished for loving him. The room went still. Evelyn looked at her. Your name, ma'am? Laverne Fuller. Mrs. Fuller, Evelyn said. Did anyone from the court ever tell you where these fees were going? Laverne gave a short laugh. No, ma'am. They just told us if we didn't keep paying, things could get worse. Emily felt the words lodge somewhere behind her ribs. Things could get worse. That was how systems like this survived. Not with one dramatic threat, but with 1,000 official-sounding warnings that taught people not to ask questions. Laverne tapped one of the notices with her finger. I cleaned houses for 18 months to keep up with that one. Sold my husband's tools, too. He'd been dead 6 years. I still sold them. No one in the room interrupted her. My grandson made mistakes, she continued. I know that. We're church people. We don't call wrong right. But that judge, her mouth tightened. That man looked at us like we were born owing him something. Evelyn gave Mercer a look. Get full copies. Every page. Yes, ma'am. As Mercer moved to scan the documents, more names started coming in. A retired bus driver whose son had paid court debt for 6 years after release. A widow from Bronzeville whose nephew had been billed for supervision costs while already in custody. An older couple who had refinanced their home to keep their grandson from defaulting on fees they did not understand. By midnight, the hallway outside the conference room held 6 families and a quiet that felt heavier than panic. These were not loud people. Most of them spoke softly, politely, even now. Older Americans who had spent their whole lives knowing that institutions listened best when you did not sound angry. But the pain in their folders was unmistakable. Emily moved between them, taking statements. Every conversation pulled the same thread. Whitmore punished the poor twice. First with the sentence, then with the bill. Down in the secure room, Maya sat with her mother's summary chart open in front of her. She had read the first 10 names 3 times. She was on number 11 now, forcing herself not to skip the details. Age, charge, prior, record, sentence, added fees, the same pattern. Again and again. A soft knock sounded, and Evelyn stepped in. Maya looked up. There are more. Yes. How many? We don't know yet. Maya swallowed. You knew something like this existed, didn't you? Evelyn did not answer immediately. She shut the door behind her and sat across from her daughter. I knew there were judges who treated sentencing like theater. I knew there were jurisdictions that used fines and fees as a second punishment against the poor. I suspected there were people dressing greed in respectable paperwork. She paused. I did not know Whitmore had built this much of a machine. Maya lowered her eyes to the chart. He looked at me, like he had already measured what I was worth. He had, Evelyn said. That's what predators do. Maya's hand tightened on the edge of the paper. Then why does everybody act shocked now? Because cruelty gets easier for people to ignore when it hides behind forms, codes, and procedure. Maya was quiet. Then she asked, Are they here because of me? Evelyn studied her face. They are here because a door opened. You are the reason it opened. That matters. But their pain was real before tonight. Maya nodded slowly. Outside, Emily finished taking a statement from a man in his 60s with a tremor in his right hand. He held a stack of notices bound by a rubber band. My boy got out 4 years ago, he said. Still paying on paper they sent him from that courtroom. You tell me how a sentence ends if the bill don't. Emily did not have an answer worthy of the question. She took the documents and carried them back into the conference room, where Daniel Mercer was pinning transaction charts to a whiteboard. Stuart Bell's consulting shell had now been linked to 3 separate vendor pathways tied to Whitmore's courtroom fee structures. Caleb Bell's name surfaced in procurement approvals. The money trail was no longer vague. It was narrowing. Mercer pointed to the latest printout. We froze one account. Another tried to move out $28,000 before the hold hit. Somebody's nervous. They should be, Evelyn said. Emily laid the new receipts on the table. Families are showing up with original notices and payment records. Some go back years. Evelyn looked at the growing stack and then at the glass wall, beyond which more people were waiting on plastic chairs under courthouse lights, too bright for midnight. This is no longer a review, she said quietly. It's an excavation. Nobody disagreed. A few minutes later, Evelyn brought Maya upstairs. Not through the main hall. Not in cuffs. 2 federal agents walked with them. But Maya moved under her own power, bandage visible beneath the rolled sleeve of a borrowed cardigan someone had found for her. When the families in the waiting area saw her, the room shifted. Laverne Fuller was the first to stand. Maya stopped. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Laverne looked at the bandage on Maya's arm. Then into her face. He did that to you? She asked. Maya nodded once. Laverne's expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Then he got careless, she said. The words passed through the room like a truth everyone understood. A retired man near the wall rose slowly to his feet. Then the widow from Bronzeville. Then the couple with the home refinance papers. One by one, the older men and women in that waiting area stood up. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the grave steadiness of people who had spent too many years carrying humiliation in envelopes. Maya looked from face to face and felt something inside her settle into place. Whitmore had wanted her to feel alone in that courtroom. He had failed. Evelyn glanced at her daughter, then at the families, then back toward the conference room where the charts, receipts, and names were still spreading across the tables. Get everyone's statements, she told Emily. Every fee notice, every payment slip, every threat letter. I want the human cost documented next to the money trail. Emily nodded. Maya stood in the center of the waiting room with blood once spilled by the court still hidden beneath fresh bandages. And for the first time since the sentence was read, she understood what was happening with perfect clarity. This was not only the beginning of Whitmore's fall. It was the moment the people he had counted on staying quiet began to rise. One receipt at a time. By midnight, the federal building had become something Judge Harold Whitmore had never planned for. It was no longer a place where fear moved in one direction. The waiting area outside the temporary conference room had filled with older black parents, grandparents, uncles, widows, men with weathered hands, Women holding envelopes that had been opened and refolded so many times, the paper felt like cloth. Some sat in silence with their documents in their laps. Others spoke in low voices, comparing dates, case numbers, the language on their notices. Again and again, the same words surfaced: administrative recovery, compliance assessment, supplemental review, post-judgment enforcement. Emily Ross stood near the copier with another stack of fee notices in her hands and felt a sickness settle deeper in her chest with every page she touched. None of it had looked dramatic when she first saw it in the files. That was the genius of it. It was not built to look dramatic. It was built to look official. Daniel Mercer moved between tables, pinning fresh sheets to the whiteboard. Corporate charts, vendor pathways, timestamps, family relationships. One red line now connected the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund to Bell Judicial Strategies. Another linked Bell Judicial Strategies to 2 procurement contractors repeatedly approved in cases carrying Whitmore's enhanced financial penalties. Evelyn Williams stood at the head of the room, reviewing a growing list of defendants. Her posture was straight, her expression controlled, but the pace of her orders had sharpened. I want race, income level, sentence length, and fee totals cross-referenced, she said. I want release status flagged. I want every vendor payment under WLCF matched against courtroom penalty dates. And I want independent custody on the original receipts from these families before anyone decides paper can go missing. Mercer nodded. Already started. Maya stood near the back wall in the borrowed cardigan, her bandaged arm tucked close to her body. Nobody had asked her to leave. Nobody had told her to sit down and stay quiet anymore, but she still felt the sentence on her skin like something cold and wet. Life without parole. The words had not stopped existing just because people now spoke to her with more care. An older man in a tan overcoat approached the intake table with a folder held flat in both hands. My name is Louis Harper, he said to Emily. My son's case was 3 years ago. Whitmore gave him 8 years and nearly $30,000 in court costs and fees. We never understood why the number kept changing. Emily took the folder. Do you still have the notices? Harper gave a sad smile. Ma'am, when a court keeps threatening your child on paper, you learn not to throw anything away. He handed over a stack of letters clipped with a rusting binder clip. Emily scanned the first page and felt her stomach drop again. Same coding, same language, same pattern. Maya watched from across the room as more names were written onto the board. Andre Fuller, Jerome Pike, Latasha Hines, Marcus Bellamy, Denise Warren. The names did not feel like data. They felt like an indictment made of people. Evelyn turned toward her daughter. You need to sit. I'm fine. You're pale. I said I'm fine. The answer came out sharper than Maya intended. A few heads turned. Evelyn said nothing for a second. Then she crossed the room and lowered her voice. Being upright is not the same as being fine. Maya looked away. I don't want to be put somewhere quiet while everybody else carries this. Evelyn studied her face. You think this is punishment if I protect you? I think he wanted me invisible, Maya said. I'm done helping him. That stopped Evelyn, not because the words were defiant, because they were true. Across the room, Emily was interviewing a widow from Bronzeville named Claudette Shaw, whose grandson had been billed thousands in community reentry monitoring costs while still incarcerated. They said if we fell behind, it could affect his standing, Claudette said, voice trembling but steady enough to continue. So I paid what I could. Social Security check, church sewing money, my husband's old life insurance. You keep paying when the letterhead looks official. You think maybe the next envelope will be the last one. Was it? Emily asked softly. Claudette gave a hollow laugh. No, ma'am. It never is. Mercer came over with another sheet in hand. We've got a problem. The room quieted. What kind? Evelyn asked. Financial witness tied to Bell Judicial Strategies. Mid-level account administrator. Name is Sandra Kroll. She handled reimbursement schedules and vendor certification. We had a request in to secure her interview first thing in the morning. He looked down at the page. She just vanished. Emily straightened. Vanished how? She left her apartment 40 minutes ago. Car still there. Phone dead. Neighbor saw two men in a dark SUV. Evelyn's face hardened. Did she know we were looking at her? Mercer hesitated. Not officially. Then somebody's moving faster than we are. Maya felt the air in the room shift. Up to that point, the corruption had lived in files, receipts, and names. Now it had moved. That made it more dangerous and more real. Emily asked, "What did Kroll have?" "Vendor routing records," Mercer said. "Possibly internal emails. If she talked, she could tie the fund to the Bell network directly." Evelyn gave her answer without pause. "Find her." Mercer was already reaching for his phone. "Put a hold on all Bell-linked travel, banking, and device activity. Notify FBI field office. Quietly, Khan. I do not want sirens yet. And get eyes on Whitmore's chambers and his residence." "Yes, ma'am." As Mercer moved out, the room fell into a tense hush. One of the older women sitting in the waiting area lifted a hand to her chest, as if steadying her breathing. Maya looked at her mother. "They're trying to bury it." Evelyn met her eyes. That's what men like him do when secrecy stops protecting them. Maya thought of the courtroom, of the file flying at her, of Whitmore's voice when he said her mother had failed. Back then, he had sounded untouchable. Now the sound of his power was changing. It was no longer certainty. It was panic, disguised as procedure. Emily came over carrying another handful of copied notices. "We should move the families somewhere more secure," she said. "If this is widening, we don't know who else is watching." Evelyn nodded. "Agreed. No one leaves without giving us contact information. Arrange transport if they need it. I want every original document logged before dawn." One of the older men near the door spoke up then. He had been silent for nearly an hour. Broad shoulders, gray at the temples, voice low and rough with age. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn, "we came because we've been paying for years and nobody listened. Don't let this turn into one more stack of paper." Evelyn walked to him herself. "It won't," she said. He held her gaze. "People in buildings like this say that all the time." Evelyn did not flinch. "I know. That is why I'm not asking you to trust the building. I'm asking you to watch what we do next." The man gave one slow nod. Maya stood a few feet away and felt those words settle inside her. Watch what we do next. Not hope. Not wait. Watch. The conference room door opened again, and Daniel Mercer returned, breathing harder than before. "We've got movement on Whitmore's side," he said. His clerk made 2 late calls from a private line. One to Stuart Bell, one to a number tied to a document shredding vendor used by court administration. Emily swore under her breath. Evelyn's voice turned to iron. "Lock down records now. Physical and digital. I want agents on every archive room, every disposal route, every terminal that touched his fee appendices. Nobody cleans anything tonight." Mercer nodded and left again at a near run. The building was awake now in a new way. Not with the routine fatigue of bureaucracy, but with the hard pulse of a structure being forced to testify against itself. Maya looked through the glass wall at the waiting families, at the envelopes and folders in their laps, at the men and women who had been punished one payment slip at a time, long before she ever walked into Whitmore's courtroom. The cut on her arm throbbed beneath the bandage. Her body still remembered the force of the file hitting her. The sentence still sat on her chest like a stone, but something else now stood beside it. She was no longer seeing one judge destroy one life. She was watching a whole machine exposed by the people it had counted on keeping small. And somewhere in Chicago, a woman named Sandra Kroll was missing because the wrong people finally understood they might not get away with it. At 1:07 a.m., the first real lead came from a highway traffic camera on the near west side. Daniel Mercer came through the conference room doors with a printout in one hand and his phone still in the other. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. For the first time that night, he looked less like a federal agent handling documents and more like a man running against a clock. "We found Sandra Kroll," he said. Every head in the room turned. "Where?" Evelyn asked. "Not her exactly. Her image." A traffic camera picked up a dark SUV crossing Halstead 22 minutes after her phone went dead. Plates came back to a leasing company, tied to Bell Judicial Strategies. Emily Ross was already on her feet. "So, they took her," Mercer nodded once. Looks that way. Maya felt the room tighten around the word, and around midnight, Sandra Kroll had been an accountant with a useful memory. Now she was proof that someone inside Whitmore's circle believed paper alone would not save them. Evelyn moved first. Who's running point? FBI field office is in motion. Quiet team. No lights yet. Good. What do we know about Kroll? Mercer dropped a file on the table and flipped it open. Mid-level financial administrator. 46. Divorced. Lives alone. No priors. Worked contract compliance for Bell-linked entities. Signed off on reimbursement sequencing, vendor certification, and consulting disbursement summaries. If anybody outside the family structure knew how the money actually moved, it was her. Emily leaned over the file. Would she have kept copies? Mercer looked at her. That's what we're hoping. Maya spoke for the first time. Not hoping. Counting on. The room went quiet for a second. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Why? Maya's bandaged arm rested against her side. Her face was pale from fatigue, but her eyes had sharpened again. Because people in jobs like that know when something feels wrong before they know how dangerous it is. The first time she saw an amount that didn't make sense, she probably told herself it was above her pay grade. The second time, she noticed the pattern. By the third, she either quit or she kept proof. Emily turned fully toward her. You think she made backups? I think if she was scared enough to disappear this fast, she didn't start being scared tonight. No one argued with that. Mercer nodded. Her work terminal was wiped remotely 30 minutes ago. Emily swore under her breath. But, Mercer continued, the wipe failed on one external sync log. She plugged in a private storage device 3 times over the last 6 months. Evelyn's expression sharpened. Find the storage device. We're trying. The older families in the waiting area had grown quieter as the night deepened. Some had been moved into a side chamber, where coffee and bottled water were finally brought in. Others remained on the plastic chairs, their envelopes clutched in tired hands, unwilling to leave before dawn. They had waited years. A few more hours no longer felt like time that belonged to anyone else. Inside the conference room, Mercer spread out a city map. A route had been marked from Sandra Kroll's apartment toward a warehouse corridor near the river, and then south toward an industrial block not far from the port. One phantom toll ping, he said, pointing. Then nothing. But Bell Judicial Strategies leased storage space 2 miles from here under a logistics subcontractor. Emily frowned. A records dump? Maybe. Maybe a holding location. Maybe both. Evelyn gave the order without hesitation. Move. Mercer looked toward Maya, then back at Evelyn. You want her relocated before we go in? Yes. Federal protection. No media visibility. No standard transfer chain. Maya straightened. I'm not going anywhere blind. Evelyn's eyes moved to her. This is not a negotiation. No, Maya said quietly. But it is my case. It became larger than your case 2 hours ago. I know that, Maya said. That's exactly why I need to know what's happening. The words hung there. Not disrespectful. Not emotional. Just true. Emily broke the silence carefully. She's right about one thing. Whitmore picked her because he thought she was alone. If this breaks the way it should, her voice matters. Evelyn looked from Emily to Maya. Fatigue had not softened her, but something else had entered her expression now. Calculation, layered over concern. You will be briefed, she said at last. Not exposed. Maya nodded once. It was enough. 40 minutes later, a smaller team gathered in a secure sub-basement operations room. Maya was not taken into the field, but Mercer left a live update channel open under Evelyn's authority. Emily stayed too. Seated near the table with a yellow legal pad she no longer pretended was for ordinary notes. The first update came from an FBI tactical lead just after 2 a.m. Approaching south entrance. Minimal exterior movement. 1 vehicle confirmed. The second came a minute later. Loading bay secured. Then silence. Maya sat very still, one hand gripping the edge of her chair. She could hear the low static of the line, the faint movement of people breathing into headsets somewhere across the city. Then, we have 1 female, conscious, restrained. Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. Mercer's voice came through after that, tighter than before. Confirm identity. A beat. Confirmed. Sandra Kroll. Maya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. But the next words changed the room again. We also have boxes. Multiple file cartons. Labeled vendor compliance, training reimbursements, and judicial outreach. And there's a portable shred unit running in the back. Evelyn stood up. Shut it down. Preserve everything. Mercer came back on. Ma'am, there's more. We found an encrypted drive taped inside the underside of Kroll's desk drawer. She says she kept it in case she ever needed leverage. Maya looked up sharply. Emily whispered, "You were right." Maya did not answer. She was listening too hard. Sandra Kroll's statement was taken on site and patched through in fragments as agents moved her to safety. Her voice shook, but the substance did not. She confirmed that Bell Judicial Strategies was used as a pass-through. She confirmed that Stuart Bell reviewed selected fee packages. She confirmed that Caleb Bell handled procurement channels designed to disguise repeat judicial-linked routing. And worst of all, she confirmed that Judge Harold Whitmore was not merely aware of the system. He approved target profiles. Emily stared at the speakerphone. Target profiles? Kroll's voice came thin through the line. Defendants least likely to fight. Low income. Limited counsel. No media risk. A lot of black defendants. Because Bell said they drew less public sympathy and were easier to bury under fee pressure. No one in the room moved. Maya felt her stomach drop in a long, cold wave. She had known. She had understood. But hearing it said aloud in that blunt language was different. It made the courtroom feel smaller in memory, more deliberate, more rotten. The line crackled again. "There's one more thing," Sandra Kroll said. Mercer prompted her. "Go ahead." "I kept copies of internal audio transcriptions," she said. "Not full recordings. Draft transcriptions from meetings. One of them mentions your girl." Maya's fingers tightened on the chair. Evelyn's voice turned to steel. "Read it." Pages shuffled on the other end. Then Kroll spoke, stumbling once before continuing. Whitmore said, "Young, black, female, no visible protection, clean enough to look symbolic, vulnerable enough to disappear. If we're going to make an example, make it expensive." The room fell silent in a way that did not feel like quiet. It felt like impact. Emily looked at Maya, but Maya was staring straight ahead now. Face drained of color, jaw set so tightly, it hurt to see it. Whitmore had not simply seen her and decided she was guilty. He had seen her and calculated her value. Evelyn did not speak for several seconds. When she finally did, her voice was low and absolute. "Bring Kroll in. Seal every box. Freeze every linked account by sunrise. And from this point forward, Judge Harold Whitmore is no longer a rumor wrapped in a robe." Maya lifted her eyes then. For the first time since the sentence, the fear inside her was no longer the biggest thing in the room. Now it had company. Now it had proof. By 8:40 the next morning, the federal courthouse had a different kind of silence inside it. Not the usual silence of procedure, where people lowered their voices because power lived in the walls. This was the silence that comes when too many people in one building know something terrible is about to be said out loud. Courtroom 9A had been reassigned for an emergency evidentiary hearing. It was larger than Whitmore's courtroom, brighter, cleaner, and already full. Reporters sat in the back with legal pads open. Families from the night before filled 2 full rows, many of them dressed in the same clothes they had worn to the courthouse after dinner, eyes red from no sleep. A retired pastor sat with his Bible closed on his lap. Laverne Fuller held her grocery envelope against her chest like a witness itself. Maya Williams sat beside Evelyn in the front row, no longer in county gray. Someone had found her a dark blazer and a plain blouse. The bandage on her arm was hidden under the sleeve, but the bruise along her shoulder still ached every time she shifted. She kept her back straight. She did not look toward the empty defense table, where Judge Harold Whitmore was expected to sit. Emily Ross stood with Daniel Mercer near the prosecution side, a stack of exhibits in her arms. She had not slept. Nobody who mattered had. At 8:47, the side door opened. Whitmore entered in a dark suit instead of judicial robes. That alone changed the room. He looked older than he had the day before, though not weaker. He still carried himself with the rigid dignity of a man who had spent decades mistaking intimidation for respect. But now there was strain under it. His jaw was too tight. His eyes moved too quickly. Beside him sat retained counsel from a Chicago defense firm, a silver-haired attorney with expensive glasses and the expression of someone who knew he had walked into a room after the fire had already started. The hearing judge, Eleanor Grant, took the bench at precisely 8:50. This hearing concerns emergency evidentiary findings, preservation orders, allegations of judicial misconduct, and possible criminal financial activity connected to prior sentencing structures. She said, "We will proceed carefully, but we will proceed." No one shifted. Mercer stood first. He moved without flourish, laid the opening binder before him, and spoke in a voice so level it gave the facts room to hit harder. Over the past 12 hours, federal investigators recovered documentary records, witness statements, financial routing materials, and corporate links connecting discretionary, court-imposed fees from multiple criminal cases to a private entity operating as the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund. We will show that this fund functioned as a laundering mechanism for money extracted disproportionately from poor defendants and black defendants through inflated judicial penalties. Whitmore's lawyer rose at once. Objection to characterization. Judge Grant did not look at him. You may object after the evidence is introduced. Mercer continued. He entered the first exhibits: charts, vendor pathways, board records, payment transfers, shell contracts. Then the family links: Stuart Bell, Caleb Bell, Bell Judicial Strategies, procurement approvals, reimbursement schedules, repeat intersections with Whitmore's sentencing appendices. Each page stripped away one more layer of distance. Emily handed Mercer the next file. He opened it, then looked toward the bench. The government also offers a witness statement from Sandra Kroll, financial administrator, formerly attached to Bell-linked entities, recovered by federal agents early this morning from an off-site industrial property where records destruction was underway. The room stirred. Whitmore's lawyer stood again. We request immediate review of chain of custody and coercion conditions. You'll have it, Judge Grant said. Sit down. Mercer called Sandra Kroll. She entered pale, shaken, and protected by two agents, but she walked on her own. When she took the stand, the whole room seemed to lean in. She confirmed the routing structure, the staged labels, the fake consulting reimbursements, the way education support and compliance training, concealed money drawn from defendants least able to resist. Then Mercer asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Did Judge Harold Whitmore know how this system operated? Sandra Kroll swallowed. Yes. Did he approve it? Yes. Whitmore's lawyer rose. Objection. Overruled, Judge Grant said. Mercer did not raise his voice. How do you know? Kroll looked down at her hands once, then back up. Because he didn't just sign off on the fee structures. He commented on which defendants could carry them without political blowback. The courtroom went dead still. Mercer stepped closer. Explain that. Kroll's voice shook, but the words held. There were internal meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes by transcript after calls. Judge Whitmore talked about risk, media risk, appeal risk, family risk. He said some defendants were easier to bury than others. Mercer paused. What did he mean by easier? Kroll looked briefly toward Maya, then away. He meant poor. He meant unknown. He meant black. A lot of the time. No one breathed. Whitmore's lawyer objected again, louder now. But Judge Grant silenced him with one sentence. Sit down, counselor. The court is listening. Mercer reached for the final marked exhibit. Miss Kroll, did you preserve any internal transcription materials involving the defendant Maya Williams? Yes. Read the passage. Kroll unfolded the page with trembling fingers. When she spoke, her voice was thin, but every word landed. Whitmore said, young, black, female, no visible protection, clean enough to look symbolic, vulnerable enough to disappear. If we're going to make an example, make it expensive. A sound broke somewhere in the gallery. Not a scream. A low, wounded sound from one of the older women in the second row. Maya did not move. Her face had gone still in that dangerous way Emily now recognized. Not numb, not broken, controlled so tightly that the pain underneath became visible only in the set of her jaw. Mercer let the silence stand for one full beat before introducing the next evidence packet. Fee comparisons by race and income level, cases flagged by pattern, original notices from families, payment slips carried in envelopes for years. One by one, the paper trail stopped looking administrative and started looking monstrous. Whitmore's lawyer finally stood and said what men like him always said when the room was already lost. My client was operating within a difficult judicial environment. At worst, this may reflect poor ethical boundaries and aggressive discretion, not criminal conspiracy. That was the first moment Judge Grant looked directly at Harold Whitmore. A difficult judicial environment, she repeated. Is that what we are calling the monetized targeting of poor and black defendants today? Whitmore said nothing. His lawyer began again, but then Emily Ross stood. It was not planned. Mercer turned toward her, surprised, but did not stop her. She held a single sheet in her hand. Your Honor, I prosecuted in Judge Whitmore's courtroom. I signed papers I should have questioned earlier. I watched him punish people and called it discipline because the building called it discipline. But what happened to Maya Williams was not a bad day in court. It was the moment the machinery stopped pretending to be justice. No one interrupted her. Emily looked toward the gallery, at the families, at the envelopes in their hands. Some people think injustice arrives with violence and sirens, she said. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence, sometimes as a bill, sometimes as a judge who has learned exactly how much cruelty official language can hide. By the time she sat down, Whitmore was no longer looking at the bench. He was looking at the table in front of him, where his own hands were folded too tightly to hide their shaking. Judge Grant reviewed the last pages in silence. Then she lifted her eyes. Based on the evidence presented, this court orders the immediate freezing of all assets associated with the Whitmore Legal Consulting Fund and all affiliated Bell-controlled entities. A criminal referral is entered on the record. Prior sentencing appendices linked to discretionary fee enhancement are to be preserved, reviewed, and audited. Judge Harold Whitmore is hereby suspended from any judicial function, pending formal charges, and remanded into federal custody. That was the moment the room changed. Not because people cheered. They did not. Because men like Whitmore were supposed to leave courtrooms through private doors with their dignity intact. Instead, two federal agents stepped forward and asked him to stand. For one instant, he did not move. Then he rose, slower than he had the day before on the bench, and the whole room watched as the man who had called Maya disposable was turned away from the table and led out under guard. Maya followed him with her eyes only until he passed the second row. Then she looked down at her own hands. Yesterday they had trembled because he held her future. Today they were still. The fear had not left her, but it no longer stood alone. When Harold Whitmore disappeared through the side door in federal custody, nobody in courtroom 9A moved for several seconds. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. Then, the room exhaled. Not in celebration. Not yet. The families in the gallery had carried too many years of paper, too many nights of fear, too many half-paid notices and unanswered calls to mistake one hearing for the end of anything. But something had changed all the same. The man who had looked down from the bench as though he owned the fate of poor people and black families had just been led out under guard in front of witnesses. For people like Laverne Fuller, that alone bordered on the unbelievable. Maya stayed seated beside her mother as the room began to stir. Reporters rushed for the doors. Court officers spoke into radios. A pastor in the second row lowered his head and pressed one weathered hand against the cover of his Bible. Emily Ross stood frozen near counsel table, one hand still on the back of her chair, as if the hearing had ended faster than her body knew how to accept. Then Laverne rose. She did it slowly, with the careful stiffness of a woman who had spent years working through pain without calling attention to it. She turned, not toward the doors, but toward Maya. My grandson's name was Andre Fuller, she said. The room quieted again. Maya stood. Laverne took a folded receipt from her envelope and held it up with trembling fingers. This one, she said, looking down at it. I paid out of money I'd put aside for my funeral. That judge never saw any of us. Not really. He saw figures, cases, bills. Her voice roughened. But today, he saw somebody look back. Maya did not trust herself to speak right away. Around Laverne, others began standing too. Louis Harper in his tan overcoat. Claudette Shaw from Bronzeville, one hand gripping the strap of her purse. The retired bus driver with the bent shoulders. The widow who had sold her husband's old tools. They stood not as a crowd, but as individuals, each carrying private damage that had finally found a public name. Evelyn Williams stepped back a fraction and let the moment belong to them. "Miss Williams," Louis Harper said, his voice low and worn. "They would have buried this if it had happened to one of ours alone. They almost did. Don't let anybody tell you what happened in there this morning was small." Maya looked at him, then at the others. "It doesn't feel small." "No," Claudette said quietly. "It feels late." That landed harder than anything else had. Late. Late for the men still paying off phantom fees. Late for the mothers who had died keeping receipts in church envelopes. Late for the fathers who had refinanced homes, sold tools, worked double shifts, and still been told the balance remained due. Late for every family that had mistaken official letterhead for truth because nobody had ever taught them that the law could be dressed like a thief. Emily crossed the room then, slower than before, and stopped near Maya. Her face was pale with exhaustion. "I've got preliminary review requests drafted," she said to Evelyn. "Emergency review for every flagged sentencing package. Some can be stayed immediately. Others will need hearings." Evelyn nodded. "File them all." Emily glanced at Maya. "There are more names coming in." "How many?" Maya asked. Emily gave a tired, helpless look. Enough that records had to open a second intake table. Outside the courtroom, the hallway had become a river of people, paper, and whispers. Federal agents stood posted at both ends. Clerks hurried by carrying sealed archive boxes. On a bench beneath the high courthouse windows, an older man sat with his hat in his hands, staring at a stack of notices as if seeing them for the first time. One of Mercer's agents approached Evelyn with a folder. "Ma'am, we've begun the first review set. 14 cases with matching enhanced fee language. 3 include active collection orders. 2 defendants are still in custody." "Names," Evelyn said. He opened the file. Andre Fuller, Denise Warren, Jerome Pike. Laverne stepped closer the instant she heard her grandson's name. "What does active mean?" The agent looked to Evelyn. She answered herself. "It means we can move." Laverne's hand flew to her mouth. Not everyone cried in moments like that. Older people often did something else first. They grew still. They went inward. They checked the words for weakness before they trusted them. Laverne stood rooted in place, eyes wide, chest barely moving, as if hope itself had become dangerous from disuse. Maya watched her and thought of the night before, of the holding room, the untouched sandwich, the blood drying beneath gauze, the paper where Whitmore had priced her life like a debt account. Yesterday, she had been one name under a judge's hand. Today, she was standing in a courthouse hallway, while another woman waited to hear whether her grandson might come home. This was what the hearing had opened. Not revenge, return. Daniel Mercer joined them carrying another folder and a look that said the morning had already outrun the hour. "The financial freeze is holding. Bell Judicial Strategies is locked. So is the fund. Stuart Bell's attorney has started calling every 10 minutes. Let him call," Evelyn said. Mercer almost smiled. "We also found 3 defendants whose fees continued to grow while they were already incarcerated." Claudette Shaw let out a broken little laugh. "I told them that," she said. "I told them, how can you supervise a man who's already behind a locked door?" She shook her head. Nobody listened. Emily turned to her. "We're listening now." Claudette met her eyes. "Then, write it down right." There was no anger in the words. That made them sharper. Emily nodded once. "I will." A marshal approached quietly and told Evelyn a secure room had been prepared for family interviews and case review. She began directing people there in small groups. No theatrics, no speeches, just next steps, names, signatures, preservation orders, legal triage, the real work. The kind that actually changes a life if it is done all the way through. Before Laverne followed the marshal, she stopped in front of Maya again. "You still hurtin'?" she asked, glancing at Maya's arm. Maya gave a small nod. Laverne looked at the hidden bandage beneath the sleeve of the blazer. "Good." Maya blinked. "Good? So you remember," Laverne said. "Not just him. All of us." Then she walked away. The words stayed with Maya long after the hallway emptied. Near noon, after 3 more interviews and 2 emergency filings, Maya finally sat down in a side room with a paper cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Evelyn entered a minute later, closed the door, and set a thin packet on the table. "First review set," she said. "The court is considering immediate relief in 6 cases." Maya looked up. 6? For now? Maya stared at the packet without opening it. "That's not enough." "No," Evelyn said. "It isn't. But it's real." "Yes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya said, very quietly, "Yesterday, I thought he was ending my life." Evelyn sat across from her. "Yesterday, he thought he was." Maya looked down at the packet, at the names inside it, at the beginning of something that still felt too fragile to call justice. "The law took years from these people," she said, "and half of them probably thought no one would ever say their names back." Evelyn's expression softened, but only slightly. "Then say them." Maya lifted the packet and opened to the first page. Outside the door, the courthouse kept moving. Files, voices, footsteps, orders. But inside that small room, with the old bitterness of coffee in the air and sunlight finally reaching through the high windows, Maya began reading the names of the people Judge Harold Whitmore had tried to turn into numbers. And for the first time since the sentence, that felt like the beginning of something stronger than survival. 3 weeks later, the first check arrived in a plain white envelope that looked too ordinary to carry the weight it did. Laverne Fuller opened it at her kitchen table beneath the yellow light that had watched her pay bills for years. The table was the same one where she had sorted church envelopes, late notices, collection letters, and the courthouse receipts she had kept folded inside a grocery bag, because part of her had always believed somebody, someday, might ask to see them. Outside, Chicago was gray with early winter, and the radiator clicked like an old man, clearing his throat. Inside the envelope was a court order. Not another demand, not another threat, not another balance notice. An order vacating the enhanced fee assessments imposed on Andre Fuller under Harold Whitmore's sentencing structure, pending full review of the underlying judgment. A second page stated that collection activity had been halted immediately. A third page listed reimbursement procedures for funds wrongfully extracted through unlawful discretionary penalties. Laverne read the first sentence twice, then a third time. Her hand began to shake. Across the city, similar envelopes were arriving at other kitchen tables, to widows, to fathers, to people who had stopped opening official mail without first sitting down. One man received a notice that the compliance charges haunting his son for 4 years had been voided. A woman in Bronzeville learned the so-called supervision fees on her grandson's case had never been lawful to begin with. A retired bus driver stared at his letter for 10 minutes before calling his daughter, because he did not trust his own eyes. The courthouse had not become holy overnight. It had not transformed into mercy. Buildings did not repent. People did, or they refused to. But the machinery had been forced, at last, to say in writing what so many families had known in their bones for years. The burden laid on them had not been justice. It had been theft wearing a seal. Maya Williams stood at the window of a borrowed office on the 12th floor of the federal building, reading copies of those first relief orders as they came off the printer. The cut on her arm had been stitched properly at last. The bruise along her shoulder had faded from black to yellow. But the sentence still lived somewhere inside her, not as fear now, but as memory with edges. Life without parole. She could still hear the weight of it, still feel the courtroom hold its breath, still see Whitmore's hand when he threw the file. There were moments, usually when the building went quiet, when her body remembered before her mind did, the tremor in her breath, the instinct to brace, the flash of heat behind her ribs. Trauma did not leave just because truth had entered the room. It stayed and had to be taught new names. Behind her, Emily Ross stepped in carrying another stack of reviewed files. She looked different now, not transformed into innocence. That would have been false, but stripped down to something more honest, less polished, more useful. "We've got 9 more for emergency reconsideration," Emily said. 2 probable vacates by tomorrow if the hearing judge signs. Maya turned from the window. "And Andre Fuller?" Emily's face softened. "Release processing started an hour ago." Maya closed her eyes briefly. That one mattered in a way she could not fully explain. Maybe because Laverne Fuller had been the first woman to stand for her in that waiting room. Maybe because some stories become larger than themselves when one person's suffering catches another just in time. Emily set the files down. "There are reporters outside asking whether you'll speak at the briefing." Maya almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, nobody in that building thought I was worth listening to. Emily gave a small, tired smile. That building was wrong about a lot of things. Maya looked back out at the city. Cars moved below in slow afternoon lines. Somewhere west of the river, families were opening envelopes with hands that had learned not to expect good news from the law. Somewhere in federal custody, Harold Whitmore was no longer deciding where anyone would spend the rest of their life. Stuart Bell and Caleb Bell had both been charged. The fund had been frozen. The paper trail kept widening. And yet, for all of that, the deepest part of the story was not his fall. It was the return of names. Later that evening, in a community law center on the south side, the first public forum was held. The room was modest. Folding chairs, coffee urns, a table of store-bought cookies untouched at the back, fluorescent lights overhead, coats draped over chair backs, men and women in work clothes sitting beside retired teachers, pastors, law students, and families carrying folders thick with history. Evelyn Williams stood near the side wall, not behind a podium. She had refused to make it a victory event. There had been too much damage for that. But there had to be witness. There had to be language. There had to be a moment when the people most harmed heard, clearly and publicly, that what happened to them would not be buried under procedure again. When Maya was asked to speak, the room quieted in the particular way rooms quiet for truth they are not sure they are ready to hear. She stood with one hand resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. Her mother's discipline was in her posture. Her own scars were in the pause before she began. "They thought prison would bury people like me," she said. No one moved. What they counted on, Maya continued, was not just fear. It was exhaustion. It was paperwork. It was shame. It was the belief that if they used enough official language, ordinary people would stop believing their own eyes. An older man in the second row lowered his head. Maya's voice remained calm, but it carried. "I learned something in that courtroom. A sentence can try to erase a life. Debt can try to erase a family. And silence can help both of them do their work. But silence is not the same as dignity. Dignity speaks when it has to." She looked across the room then, not at the students first, but at the older men and women who had come with envelopes, receipts, and years of grief folded into manila folders. "The law is not sacred because a judge says it is," she said. "It is sacred only when it protects the people with the least power in the room." In the back, Laverne Fuller stood first, then Louis Harper, then Claudette Shaw, then others, slowly, carefully, with the measured grace of people who had spent decades learning how not to expect the country to stand up for them. One by one, they rose anyway. Evelyn watched from the side, arms folded, eyes bright but steady. Emily stood near the wall with a notebook in her hand and did not write a word. She simply watched. That night, before the room emptied, Evelyn and Maya signed the first charter papers for the Williams Justice Initiative. Its purpose was simple enough to say, and hard enough to live: to review predatory sentencing patterns, to challenge unlawful court debt, to defend the poor before they were turned into profit, and to make sure the next person dragged into a courtroom like Maya's would not stand there alone. When the applause came, it was not loud. It did not need to be. It sounded like something rarer than triumph. It sounded like people who had been ignored for too long hearing, at last, that the truth had come back for them. This story reminds the audience that injustice does not always come with violence or chaos. Sometimes it wears a robe, hides behind legal language, and targets those who seem the easiest to silence. Its deepest lesson is that truth, dignity, and courage still matter, especially when the system has been twisted by prejudice, greed, and abuse of power. The story also shows that silence can protect corruption, but when ordinary people speak up, keep records, and stand together, even the most untouchable figures can fall. In the end, the message is clear. Justice is only real when it protects the weak, not when it serves the powerful. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.